The BBC Trust commissioned us to do research on the way in which politics is covered by the BBC in a world that's now devolved. So Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England all had different policy regimes, and they wanted to see whether news coverage reflected that new reality. And what we found was that actually the record was pretty poor. They were often using England as a kind of default UK, so they'd tell you something was happening, it was only happening in England, but they forgot to tell you that. And they were consistently failing to compare and contrast between different policies, say in Wales, Scotland and England.
Victims of the hospital infection C. difficile.
So for example, in this package, which is pretty typical of the things we looked at back in 2007, this is a story that relates to statistics coming out of England that relate to the English health service, but nowhere in the package are we told that this is a story that relates to England only. The King Report was a report commissioned by the BBC Trust to use our research to feed into that report to make recommendations about what the BBC should do as a result of the findings of our research.
Well, one of the most satisfying parts was to see that the King Report, the research that we produced for the King Report, is now on the BBC College website. So journalists working for the BBC can go to this and have a kind of checklist to see if they're reporting devolution in an accurate way and making it relevant to all the people living in the UK.
After the BBC had made their recommendations, we were asked to see whether the BBC had improved. So we did that, and we found that indeed the BBC's coverage had got better. They were doing more comparing and contrasting across nations, and they were much less likely to use England as a default version of the UK.
It's 4, too young to be in school.
So in this example, we see an example of good practice. This is where the BBC are comparing and contrasting different educational policies in England and in Wales.
In England and Scotland, the curriculum starts at 5. Whereas in Wales and Northern Ireland, the emphasis on learning through play continues right through until children are 7.
I think the research had a profound impact. I think we'd known for some time there was a difficulty. We were hearing from audiences that the BBC network news wasn't really grappling effectively with a world, a UK that was changing around us. And I think what the research did, and the King Report more generally, was it really put some fact, it put an evidence base around the issue, and it opened a lot of people's eyes.
Well, I think it certainly increased the quantity of reporting in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. There was a noticeable increase compared to the commercial channels that actually, from 2008 to 2009, actually reduced the amount of coverage of the nations.
It was a profound moment for the BBC where we realised we couldn't continue to see these devolutionary matters as something of a peripheral issue. They were absolutely at the heart of the way we told stories about the UK. And I think there has been a dramatic difference in the accuracy of what we do, but there's an also more intelligent interrogation of the differences, the asymmetry of the UK and the policy differences across the UK.
Well, broadcasting, television in particular, is still the primary source of information for most people in the UK. Usually it scores between 70 and 80% of people say it's their primary source of information.
There was a direct relationship between what we found, the problems that we identified, and then a series of actions that the BBC had to take to do something about it. So it was quite a nice thing to be involved in from that point of view, because here you had a piece of research that you knew would have an impact across all of the BBC platforms.